With the new featured exotic armors list comes fresh builds, and with it, some that are whack and some that are wild. So, let's talk about Promethium Spurs. Buildcrafting is a really personal experience. Everyone's going to have different preferences, taste, or playstyle, and just like you have a favorite type of gun, you have a favorite type of build. Regardless of your preference though, it's just that, a preference. In my opinion, there's no right or wrong answer to buildcrafting, and there's no objectivity to playstyle. Though I do believe there are certain objective truths in buildcrafting, like properly synergizing your ideas or correctly using damage options or perks, buildcrafting in terms of how it makes you feel and how it fits into your playstyle or how fun you think it is a 100% subjective experience. Now I say that because I don't like Promethium Spurs. At all, really, but in no way does that make this exotic bad or a bad choice for you, and I'm going to try to spend the video explaining why I think that. First off, the title Whack or Wild is really just a fun play on words and will never be used as a damnation of an exotic or a playstyle, but rather a discussion on whether or not I had fun during my time with that exotic. There might be some that bother me more than others and some that just don't click, but regardless, the purpose of the series and buildcrafting as a whole, in my opinion, is to try things out and see if I have fun with it. Even if I don't end up liking an exotic or a build I put together, there's still so much value to extract from it since there's always something to learn or new perspectives to try. Sometimes making a whack build teaches me what makes a wild build, and in the end, I can still level up my buildcrafting as a result. With that said, I have a bit of a history with Promethium Spurs, and it received a pretty substantial rework with the launch of Edge of Fate, so I was really excited to try them out. Previously, Spurs still gave you that class regen like it does now, but they used to be able to make combo healing empowering rifts, which sounds pretty cool, right? Well, in order to make a combo rift, you had to be standing in a rift, get a whole other full charge of rift, then you had to get a kill with a solar weapon, which would spawn the combo rift at the enemy's feet. At best, you had to reposition to the new rift, and at worst, it'd be smack in the middle of a crowd of enemies you were still fighting, making all the work a complete waste. Hands down, the old version of Spurs was the single most disappointing exotic I've ever used, since it sounds so cool to be able to make combo rifts, but it was just so unreasonable to use at all, and it was near impossible to use effectively. The new Spurs, however, are a much different story, and actually just about fulfill that idea of the combo rift while making them way easier to use. Now, when you put down a healing rift, any weapon kills inside of it cause a pulse that gives you and your allies radiant, and empowering rifts instead cause a burst of cure ×1. There's no need to spawn an extra rift or specifically get solar weapon kills. You can just post up in a good spot, put down your rift, and immediately get the benefits. So the first thing I want to talk about is what Promethium Spurs does well, which is easily giving your teammates a near constant uptime on Radiant. This is a great option if you were to pair it with something like a Bolt Charge Titan and you and your team were to move as a unit, setting up shop with a Rally Barricade and a Healing Rift. You'd be in cover with healing and a weapon buff and all these bolts going off, which would be perfect for something like a Battleground or Onslaught where you need to hunker down and defend from crowds of enemies. With the recharge rate of your Rift and your teammate's Barricade, you'll both have pretty well 100% uptime and can strategize around having essentially a mobile bunker. The strategy sounds like it'd be really fun and viable, again, especially for something like Onslaught, but as a solo player, I not only wasn't able to test this out properly, but it just sort of doesn't apply to me. Even in match-made content, the likelihood I can convince a random Titan or Hunter to stand still for any amount of time is essentially zero, and the benefit of providing buffs to your teammates is only really valuable if they aren't already activating them on their own. In match-made content, generally speaking, most players have prepared builds that implement their own buffs and survivability, and they won't look to you for support. Certain options still work if you're looking to play a support role, but they're best if they work without your teammates' involvement with things like Lumina and Boots of the Assembler, or healing rifles, or even just a quick restoration grenade. I also find that rifts in the modern age of Destiny can be extremely limiting, requiring that you completely plant yourself to make them work. In doing so, you lose so many important options like pressing an advantage, repositioning for a moving enemy, or avoiding pressure applied by a champion. They often make you a much easier target than if you were shifting around cover, and while Spurs lessen the issue with how many rifts you have, in the end, this is still where I had my problems. Being a solo player and choosing to run Spurs on Solar, I almost exclusively went with an Empowering Rift for the cure pulses. There's also a lot of really easy ways to go Radiant right now, and with Ember of Empyrean you can easily maintain the buff, and since you're required to get weapon kills in your Rift anyways, you might as well make them Solar to synergize. With that in mind, I figured my best bet was to go for that extra option to heal. So here's why I think, in general, this just sort of doesn't work for me. Everything that Spurs can offer, regardless of what rift you choose, can already be implemented through the Solar subclass while also being a better version. Empowering Rifts and Radiant don't stack, and they're the exact same multiplier, so if you're already going Radiant, which is again really easy to do, the Rift is doing nothing other than applying those Cure Pulses. If you're on Solar, specifically on Warlock, you have access to one of the best survivability options in the game with Restoration ×2, which, as with Radiant, immediately outclasses the Cure Pulses from the Rift. On top of straight up outperforming the benefits from Spurs, you can also do all of this while being completely mobile. With the buffs being constantly applied on a timer, you don't need to constantly get a kill to be healed. You can disengage if you have the time and you need to while still keeping your buffs rolling. If you're planning to use Spurs, you'll need to be far less mobile, sticking to the ground inside of your rift, so there's not really a point in running Icarus Dash or Heat Rises, so you'll likely have Touch of Flame equipped anyways, and you might as well play to its strengths. I was always on a Solar primary as well, since it just made sense and it synergizes with Ember of Empyrean, so if I ever felt like I needed any additional healing involved, I could just run a heal clip weapon. Even comparing just a heal clip weapon to Spurs, getting one kill with heal clip and reloading gives you Cure ×2 and your teammates ×1, where Spurs only gives ×1 to both of you. Even the class regen, which is ridiculous with Spurs, you can still have such high regen right now with 100 class and Ember of Singeing that you can always have a Rift or Phoenix Dive on demand so long as you're not dying. Now, I'm normally not one to dislike an exotic because of how much I like another exotic. I think each of them can offer something different, and potency isn't always the most important thing, but in Spurs' case, it's not another exotic that outclasses what it does, but just your subclass itself, which makes it feel like such a huge waste of an exotic slot. I also don't find the loop to be that fun. You're just basically camping out in a rift to get some healing, and it's not particularly interesting or unique. Something like Eunoia is a really interesting comparison because it also isn't necessarily standout or flashy, but the improvements it provides are so drastic and can't be replaced without the exotic, so it feels really unique and worth using. I personally had no reason to use Daybreak over Song of Flame either, and again, since it's so easy to have constant class abilities and maintain Radiant and Restoration, it just felt like Spurs weren't doing anything for me. So the reason at the top I said my preference and my opinion on Spurs doesn't make this a bad choice for you is because you might be a player that just doesn't like Restoration or doesn't want to worry about Radiant and would rather use Spurs as your healing and buff source while you build into something else like Ignitions. If that's the case, I think you might really like Spurs, especially if you like rifts in general and enjoy standing your ground. I also think it's a really great option to apply Radiant to your team if you're coordinated and your teammates are running builds that don't allow them to get Radiant on their own. For me though, when I make a build, one of my top priorities is survivability since I prefer solo play and I also prefer higher difficulty content. I gravitate really heavily towards things like Restoration and Devour, and my approach is to prioritize buffs and healing within my subclass and to use my exotic choices to increase my lethality. With that in mind, I never felt like I was getting any substantial benefits from Spurs, or even that I could enhance what it offered. I could easily outperform it with my subclass choices, but in order to have Spurs' benefits seem more impactful, I'd have to turn down or swap off the most effective parts of my Solar build. I also don't really feel like I can give you a build to work around or any real recommendations, since all you have to do with Spurs is put down your Rift and shoot bad guys. And again, trying to improve on those ideas sort of overrides Spurs. You could do something like a Subsistence Onslaught weapon to shred through a crowd, but I'd also just recommend using that on a Restoration build, since that'll help you get your max timer, and you'll be way safer than standing in a Rift, and it'll be just as, if not more, effective. In the end, I felt that Spurs unfortunately only lessened my build potential and introduced multiple restrictions that were easily outperformed by Restoration and Radiant, which don't require the dedication of my exotic slot. Though I'm happy to see Spurs receive a much needed makeover, it didn't really move the needle for me and I don't plan on using them going forward. As high as my hopes were for Promethium Spurs, to me, sadly, they still feel whack. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what featured Warlock exotic you think I should run next, and subscribe to the channel to keep an eye out for more videos soon.